All right, we are recording. This is the Network Plumbing Working Group meeting for May 24th, 2018. I will paste the agenda doc into the chat just in case people haven't seen that already. All right, it's in the chat. Too bad we don't all have ice cream cones. That would be amazing. All right, so the first one I think we added last time, and that was interface request as part of extended options. I don't remember what the conversation there was about, but I think it was about if we wanted to let the user request a specific interface name as part of the extended annotation options. Does that ring a bell with anybody?
I think this one we added with some kind of I think it's already added, right? No.
No, we only have IP request and MAC request. I think we were talking about like if you wanted to give a particular attachment ETH0 instead of the default like net 0.
Okay.
Then we thought that would be useful.
And just looking into the reference implementation, I think Tomo has added some of the details on that part.
Right. I think he went ahead and added it maybe without it being in the standard, but we agreed to talk about it.
Not as a standard. Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's a bad option. And actually, let me move up the, oh, it's right underneath it anyway. Well, I mean, that probably leads into a larger discussion around how to handle the extended options. There were some comments on the specification around whether the set of keys for the extended annotation, like IP request, MAC request, that kind of thing, was final, or would we be able to pass arbitrary keys through to plugins? And as the spec had been written, this list was final and all other keys were reserved. I suggested maybe we could namespace those keys, but then I think it was Levin to whatever the person's name is on the comments pointed out that passing them through namespaced would not really work with options for CNI plugins that are already out there per convention.
I put this one, this JSON format actually. This is the one you're referring to, right? In the chat, I put the body YAML file.
Let's see. Yep. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Namespace request, interface request. So basically, as it stands right now, the reference plugin or the implementation would have to transform these items into something that the CNI plugin could actually use, because right now the convention for IP request is actually IPs. And so the name that we have in the spec is not the same as the actual CNI convention for something like host local. And obviously MAC request does not exist in CNI yet, nor does interface request. So I think the decision that we would want to make here is, do we want to be able to pass these keys through directly to the CNI plugin and give some flexibility around customization in the network annotation? Or do we want to basically say this list is the only thing available and the meta plugin has to translate these items into something that we know CNI supports?
Yeah, I think is the second which you said could be the best way to go ahead, because if the CNI libraries already support, right, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. What is the CNI is doing? I was thinking reuse, maybe we as in the libraries of whatever it's providing right now. I think there was one pull request from Mike. It was merged. I don't know. Do you know that pull request got merged?
For the CNI side?
Yeah.
His was something different. His was about making the interface name part of the uniqueness tuple for an attachment.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yep. And a large part of what his did got merged, but he needs to update that pull request to actually change some things, and then we need to change the reference plugins. We went over and looked at all the plugins, and we know host local needs to be changed because it only keys off the container ID. Sorry, not the container ID, the network name. And the container ID, but we need to add interface name there. But then there's also 3 or 4 other plugins that do things with only the container name and ID. And so we need to update those as well. So it's going to happen. It's just going to take a little bit longer.
Okay.
But that should basically solve the multiple attachment problem once that happens. But again, that's going to require a bump of the CNI spec, which we've already done for other reasons, but then a new release of the CNI plugins, the reference plugins. I mean, obviously, if you're not using a reference plugin, you can implement this however you want right away. But if you use reference plugins, it'll take an update of those. Well, okay, so it sounds like what were you saying, Corral? Were you saying that we should try to match what CNI currently does for the ones that CNI supports and then just make up names for the others?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay, and then have the implementation or meta plugin transform those as needed?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, especially in the case of interface request, if we want to allow custom interface names specified in the pod annotation, CNI already has like CNI if name. And so that is going to need some kind of meta plugin transformation anyway.
Okay.
So I don't think we can really get around doing a little bit more work in the meta plugin.
Okay.
Okay.
By the way, is there anyone tried that the new meta plugin which we released like last week? Actually, anyone tried out? No one tried it.
Maybe some people on the overall sig-network did.
Okay, yeah.
But all right, so let's see. Transform values. Sorry, I'm just taking some notes here.
There was a question from Sharath actually.
Okay, what was that one?
He's asking about are you making the request for MAC address?
Oh, there we go. I see it. Sorry,
yeah.
for a second. Okay, so the idea there is that when the meta plugin is reading the extended JSON list annotation form, that it would take those options and then essentially translate those into something that CNI would work with. Does that make sense? Because it looks like IPs is okay. A MAC does not exist yet, and so we either need to add the MAC request to CNI as a convention, and then have the reference plugins actually use it.
It's too bad Suresh is not here, but when you create certain type of network objects, you really want to set the MAC as well, right? And there is some new support coming in the DHCP for IPv6, where actually an implementation can ask for MAC addresses, but an IPAM can sort of support MAC addresses as well to a hypervisor or similar, or in this case, it could be to the CNI itself on a machine.
Yep. Yeah. IP address is there already. IP for static IPM. The host local plugin also supports a specific IP address request that then it will reserve from the pool. Mac is not supported by anything at this point. And okay. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
I like it. It's neat.
Okay. Does that answer the question, Sarath?
No, he's asking how the request is made through the annotations. Actually, I think it was documented in the spec. Actually, did it?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, you can request this stuff through the annotations in the pod on a pod specific basis, but you can also always add it through the CNI configuration itself, whether that's on disk or in configuration. But if you do it through the CNI configuration itself, then it's going to be requested for all pods that attach to that network. So that's not extremely useful. Okay, excellent. If anybody's listening to the recording later, there's some questions being asked on the group chat. So that's what we're referring to. All right, back to the agenda. So I think the next item was around the versioning, and you had brought that up, Corral, for a thick plugin version. And I think you had a really good point there. As the spec specifies, it would basically lock to a specific version. And I don't know of any good ways to get around that besides requiring the meta plugin to call version on that other plugin and then figure out some compatible version between what the meta plugin understands and what the thick plugin understands. And that seems like a lot of work. So I don't really know what the best option there is.
Yeah, because I was while coding, I was stunned with that one because currently we didn't show any demo with the thick plugins. So if you have any examples or demo, happy to work on that one.
Okay. I mean, well, I take that back. I did have an idea.
Okay.
The only idea I had there was to actually, well, two ideas really. Let me, go up in the spec to where it is on my computer. Okay, there we go. Sorry. So the two thoughts I had were in the config, if there is no network name present in the config string, we could actually have the meta plugin insert the current network name into that config string. But actually that doesn't work. Well, maybe it does. I don't know. That seems a little non-obvious.
Yeah.
The other option is that we could add a plugin CNI version member to the network spec, which you set, and that like generates the thing, but that seems a little odd too.
Yeah, because the spec will also change sometimes, right? Because in CNI community you can come up with a new spec, CNI version. So that's what I was also wondering.
Yeah. I mean, we could try we could add the plugin version, plugin CNI version to the network spec, and then it would be fairly simple to create.
Okay.
The JSON to call the thick plugin with.
Okay.
And if that is empty, then we just use like version 010, or maybe we set a base version or something like that.
Okay.
I mean, that seems easier than having the meta plugin unmarshal the JSON and then insert the name field and then remarshal it.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, that option may be okay, but I'm thinking whether it will be complicated or not. I mean, just I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Hmm. Or we can put it as a open. Maybe we can discuss with Tomu and Doug,
Sure.
because yeah, I think that part they implemented that part actually. I didn't implement that part actually, so I also have least knowledge on that. The one thing I was in the network spec, there was one sentence it was mentioned that if both the plugin and the config exist, then the key will take precedence over the plugin actually in section 3.2.
Right.
So I mentioned that currently in the reference implementation, if the both the things present, it will turn out to be an error. But I was
Yeah.
wondering whether it's an error or how we should have been implemented.
I mean, either one. I don't think it's a big change.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody else have thoughts on whether it should be an error or a precedence thing? Does everybody understand what Corral is talking about? Maybe not.
I don't think so.
Okay. What do you think the benefit or the trade-offs there would be?
No,
Because the problem there is going to be that we don't really get good resource validation for custom resources.
Mhm,
It's basically just a map. I don't think
mhm,
you can say or you can enforce any kind of error handling
mhm,
in Kubernetes itself. So what would end up happening would be, as a user, you would set both these fields and then you try to start a pod with this particular network and then it would just error out, which
mhm.
maybe that's acceptable.
Okay, okay.
Saying
Uh,
it's up to the CNI plugin to error it, or is it something else?
It would be up to the meta plugin that
Okay.
implements the spec to error it or to implement the precedence, either one. It doesn't really make a difference to me.
I guess there will not be that many meta plugins around, so it will be fairly consistent messages you should get.
Yeah. Hey, do you have a preference, Carell?
no, I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it just seemed like if you actually put configuration into the network spec, that's more work than putting in a plugin name. So maybe you meant to have it use the configuration.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's the thought. Let's see here. So I'm just going to take some notes really quick on the thick plugin stuff and the CNI version number. To the generated JSON, if not present. All right. The next item I had was meta plugin implementation readiness versus cluster-wide default network. I was updating a bunch of stuff at the bottom of the document around requirements on the cluster-wide default network, and came across the issue where most CNI plugins now, if they're doing something, if there's something like Calico or OpenShift SDN or whatever that actually start a daemon process, they will only write out their config file to etc cni.net.d when they are ready. And that might be, a couple seconds after they start up, and that's how they actually signal Kubernetes to begin starting pods on that node. And it occurred to me that as we had worded readiness, the meta plugin should not write its own file to etc cni.net.d until it was sure that the default network was ready. And so I was wondering how actually would that work? because most thick plugins currently write their file to the standard CNI directory, etc cni-net.d, and I'm not aware of plugins that allow that directory to be changed. So, basically what would happen would be if the meta plugin is waiting for the default plugin to write its file, then the default plugin writes its file, and then Kubernetes picks up that default plugin, and then finally the meta plugin writes its file, then, we've got a problem, and Kube isn't using the right thing.
Yeah, it's a known problem actually. Because in this case, what happens is like depending upon the file name, it will precedence, right? In the kubelet. Yeah, that's the big problem actually. Then there will be a race condition. So far, yeah.
Yeah, I mean the other option here is, and actually I just thought about this. If you want to use a meta plugin, we could require that Kubernetes be pointed at a different CNI config directory. And I think as of 110 Kubernetes, or 111, I forget which, Kubernetes has that option.
Yeah.
To look in a different place. So.
Yeah, but the thing is that most of the people, if I've seen so many people don't know that one at all. Who are trying
Yeah.
Kubernetes. No way they know this. So people usually do it with Kube admin or Kube spray. They have no idea on that one. I mean, in my experience.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, the ugly way then would be to do a change root, right? And sort of basically virtualize the core CNI, but it's fucking ugly.
Yeah, I mean, the even longer term solution would be something like gRPC.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, I will be the champion for gRPC. I don't know when that will happen.
Do you want to write that, Carell?
No, I don't know. I don't want to get into trouble.
Right. Okay, well, I'll just make a note here. Let's see, run car user run Kubernetes with Spectrum.
But this is a known problem, right? If you install with kubeadmin or something, it will write. I mean, Fanel or Calico, whatever you install, it will always try to start with 10 something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even if you have the meta plugin write a file that is higher in precedence for Kubernetes, the problem is Kube looks for the file the first time and then doesn't really update.
If we have an automated multis, right? If I think Daga has a daemon set of multis. If the daemon set of the multis have like 00-multis.config, then multis got the precedent in the kubelet, and then currently we have issues like, I mean, there is a intermediate solution Daga has provided that you provide the default networking delegates, but in future we can change that to the config file. What do you think?
Sorry, I remembered something that I'd seen in Kube CNI, and now I am going back to look at that really quick. So I did not get that.
I mean, to really solve it, you will have to change too much in Kubernetes, right? I mean, because to listen or wait for something that is a file and not the true sentinel in some ways, hard to work around. You would want to have specified. I mean, you know from the specification which networks that are there, right? And then they should tell in a better way when they're ready. But it's not going to happen.
I think I didn't communicate properly. I'm just typing that one in chat. I think these are, if you see in the chat, right? If you have a multis daemon set which produce the config file like this, then by default, I think Fanel and Calico create the config file like 10 something. Yeah. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well, okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
So in this case, Multis will take the precedent, and in the Multis config file, we can measure which is the default config, like which whether you want Flannel or Calico, we can say it in the config file of Multis.
Right. The only problem there is going to be that if 10 flannel conf gets written first, Kubernetes might pick that up before Multis is able to write out its file. So
Yeah.
that's the issue. And looking at the Kube CNI driver code, it does look like, hang on, yeah, it does look like Kube will actually, I mean, obviously it watches that directory, but it looks like if something else writes a file with higher precedence, Kubernetes will actually change the network plugin out underneath. So it could be the case that if Flannel writes out its conf file first, Kubernetes starts up 2 pods with Flannel, and then Multis gets around to writing its file, and then Kubernetes then starts calling Multis for everything, which is a little unfortunate.
Who developed this code?
I think originally it was Rajat, and then I touched a lot of it as well.
I think it's adapted from Rocket, right?
Yes, yeah, it was originally adapted from Rocket. I mean, partly it's because nobody was ever running Kubernetes with multiple network plugins anyway.
Yeah, okay.
And so this never was a problem.
Okay.
I'll call you back later.
Okay.
So I don't know. I think the only option we have right now without making changes to Kubernetes, which we could do since it's generic CNI, would be the specifying the config-dir to the Multis specific or the implementation specific directory.
So there's no way to tell Kubernetes which file it should be waiting for?
No, there isn't. And that's because we never reached consensus on multiple networks. So
no, I mean,
think
without touching, saying, or multi-networking, I mean, whether we can change this code a little bit, like instead of doing something like this, we can say, okay, pick something like this, the kubelet, like drastically not changing the code. I'm thinking.
I mean, again, we can change kubelet to just keep one. I mean, once it finds a network plugin, to stick with that network plugin. Anyway, I can investigate changing that. Network plugin. Sorry, I'm just looking at some code here. Well, anyway, okay, so I'll take a look at that, and let's move on in the agenda. Let's see here, DCW will investigate changing kubelet to be smarter about config precedence discovery. Okay, Corel, standardization of de facto spec. Go for it.
Yeah, this one I was thinking that we already have created this spec, right? I think you mentioned the name as version 1. So I'm thinking that whether we want to do it like how the CNA spec is, right? We can make like a standardization on this one. Like spec numbers, something like that. So whoever wants to work on multi-networking, they should follow this kind of the standard. Currently, it's we not putting this as a standard, but if you make it as a standard, right? Whoever want to implement multi-networking in whatever ways, instead of doing it differently, they could go for a standard way of doing this one. I don't know how to achieve that one. I just put it as a idea. Actually, I was discussing with Feng Feng and Tomu last week on this one, and they said it will be better for me to bring it as a open for the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of always, at least I'd always thought of it as a standard. And the reason I had always called it de facto when I was writing up stuff was that it's not formally blessed by, sig-network or anything like that. And it's not a formal Kubernetes standard. But, we could explore how to formalize it more. Currently, it was kind of, hey, we have this standard. It would be great if you'd follow it, to like device plugin and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay.
Yeah, I mean, we can try to bring it up like maybe at the next sig-network meeting or feel it out with people like Tim first and see what the process there might be.
Yeah, because we have put a lot of efforts on this documentation for like 3 or 4 months actually. It's went through a lot of iteration after iterations. So I was thinking that if you make it standard, like it will be useful.
Yeah, I'd agree. Okay, so next, network telemetry.
Yeah, the network telemetry was I was looking into the network status one. So there was a use case came to my mind like currently Kubernetes support only one networking. So in this case, if you want to send this network telemetry information, there is no way you can express the multi-networking part. But we provided this network status. I don't know who introduced this one, but I really like this feature of including the network status as a API in the annotation part. So I was looking like whether this one they're planning to use it as a network telemetry information so that in future if someone is developing like a network aware scheduling they can make use of this annotation. Or I was thinking whether we have to make some kind of standardization on this one, like how to consume this network and say like, so suppose I created a network with funnel and SRIV. So the there is some third party like Prometheus or something which read the annotation and then say this particular pod is a multi-networking pod, so I have to monitor two different interfaces in this pod, something like that. So we can say this particular interfaces how much, what is the bandwidth, and what is the input and output to packets, and something like that. I was thinking on this particular thing.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like something we could explore. I guess my first thought would be maybe not in a V1 spec, but maybe for a V2, if that's
Okay.
acceptable.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Totally fine. Yeah.
I mean,
But
I would definitely think in whatever final multi-network implementation Cube actually ends up using, that this kind of stuff would somehow be available, whether it's through an annotation like this, or whether it's through Prometheus, or something even more formal if Kubernetes was to
Just
handle.
to be clear, so it's sort of out-of-band telemetry we're talking about here, not in-band telemetry. Or basically counters, like you said there, to Prometheus, or are we talking also about the use of in-band telemetry packet fields?
yeah, something like that. Yeah. The idea is it's not very constructive. Like I just was thinking about that one actually. When I was looking for something on Prometheus, then it came to my brain that we having this network set. Why can't we use that actually? That's what.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Yep. And what is the next one? Yeah, I think that's the thing. Yeah.
And you see the meta plugin being this thing that keeps it together. So you would have an API then towards the meta plugin where you can sort of manipulate how you want to generate telemetry, or if I want to change what telemetry gets generated, or specify specific flows I want telemetry on, or is it more static?
Yeah, it's very static actually. So if you see the meta plugin, it's not like a daemon set, so it can.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So there should be someone. So the meta plugin information should known for someone so they can monitor the work. So meta plugin is a guy who will say, okay, this is what it has, this pod has. So please check these things.
Mm.
Currently, we didn't not exploring much on the network aware scheduling part actually. So if you see like this particular box has like 10 nicks, okay. So all these 10 nicks are consumed by this much workload, so I can't place this particular pod anymore here because
Okay.
Kubernetes doesn't care about network
Okay, this is
scheduling at all.
more statistics and Kubernetes To be
Yeah,
able to,
yeah,
it's not to be able to trace specific flows that go through the system.
yeah. No, no,
But,
no.
I mean,
No, yeah, so it's very easy, right? So if you have multis or meta plugin to do that, so why not we reuse that concept actually?
okay, so one of the things we're looking at outside of this is sort of when you have Istio and stuff, sort of different mesh and stuff like that, how do you trace that down to the packet level underneath to understand the path to packet state through the system? But that's another type of telemetry.
Yeah, that is very different.
Yeah. But if you just put a version on this document, right, then in many ways it would be up to the CNI providers to fulfill it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So the only issues, I mean, as Dan said before, like the CNA doesn't have any intelligence at all. Like in most of the
Uh,
cases, yeah, it's not a intelligent guy at all.
you're
So
right.
if it became daemon set, it became intelligent for some reason. I'm
Uh,
thinking like that, but I don't think it will happen.
Well, I mean, it might. If a gRPC interface happens, then there's a lot more opportunity to send out of band data back because
Yeah,
we would go back to the meta plugin.
but do you think it will be a drastic change for the CNA community actually? Just if we
Um,
change
yeah,
that.
not too much. And the way that we've discussed it in the past is that you'd essentially have kind of like a shim that would implement gRPC and then exec the reference CNI plugins if that's what you wanted to use. So I don't think that there would be a huge change for the reference plugin users, at least.
Yeah, I don't know whether you guys have a chance to see our implementation on SRV network device plugin.
I looked
So
briefly at it, yeah.
yeah,
but
so
most CNI has some active component, right? Be that a switch
yeah,
or a process, or I mean, it's something that keeps state all the time and that you can communicate with.
yeah, I will just put it shim CNI which we developed. It's not a very intelligent guy. It's just a
Uh,
panel refactored code actually. I'm just looking
or actually, so.
my internet.
So then, so who do you see the kubelet using this gRPC, or is it some administration function that would use it?
No, I mean, what we're talking about is essentially instead of having the exec model that CNI currently has, where kubelet actually execs a binary with the configuration pushed through standard in, that it would instead be more of a gRPC interface where the CNI plugin would register itself with a known endpoint. And then after that, the CNI driver, or in this case, the meta plugin implementation, whatever, would then open a connection to that plugin and keep that socket open, and then just talk.
It would serve up interfaces in a given namespace.
Not even that low. It's more about just replacing, or not replacing, but adding a an always on API option to CNI plugins instead of the current exec model.
Okay.
And there's two reasons for that. The first one is that it's a lot harder, or it's a lot heavier to exec processes on Windows, and so the Windows people had sort of wanted that. But then it also allows for asynchronous communication of like error and state and stuff back from the CNI plugin to Kubernetes, so that Kube doesn't have to pull. So things like that. And again, I mean, this has only been proposed and brought up a couple of times. Nobody's actively working on it yet, but that's mainly because people don't have time. There's general agreement from the CNI maintainers that this is, something that would be interesting to do.
Okay.
I think I can offer us up as guinea pigs if someone wants to try and do that. I mean, our CNI will have active components that are there all the time anyway, so it shouldn't be hard to sort of add for us.
Yeah.
This is, like you said, Expo is a pain in the ass. It's
So I put it in the chat. The implementation actually, it's very early stage actually. This project actually. So this this is like a shim. It's a dance idea actually. So we had to have a chat in slang. I think like 1 month or 2 months before, maybe.
It was a while ago, yeah.
Yeah. So we developed this depending upon dance idea, like we can funnel all the CNA orgs and then send it back to a daemon set, and the daemon set will provide the networking information, and then it sent back to the kubelet actually. So we are not changing anything on kubelet actually in this case, but the daemon set will be alive in overall the pod life cycle. So yeah. So that's the thing, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk about logs since we've got 10 minutes or so left? I think that was the last
Yeah,
one.
the logs. Yeah, I think currently the CNI doesn't provide any logs. Like, if there is any error, you have to check with the kubelet logs. And the kubelet logs, you have to check each and every times on the pod creation. You have to go through all the pod creation and see where the CNI is invoked. Then after that, meta plugin is invoked. Then you have to go through the errors, and even in errors you won't get exactly. Sometimes it will say like unexpected JSON output or something most of the time. So I was thinking like we should develop some kind of logs and generate the log separately in a var log, like meta plugin slash something, so that we can say like whenever the pod started, right? So what is the error happen? But I don't know like whether, because it's a binary invoke, whether we can able to create such a log. I'm not sure, but thinking whether creating a logs will be a good option or not, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it probably would be. It is quite hard to debug CNI plugins because of this. Yeah. I mean, do you want to flesh that out a little bit more and maybe make a proposal, or we can just talk about it on the list?
I think I can make a I mean, I can put your thoughts on this. I can come up with
Sure.
some proposal actually. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be cool.
Because most of the time when someone wants to use a meta plugin, they always ask me like, this is not working, that is not working. Then I will say, okay, go and check the kubelet logs, and they are not aware of what is the kubelet log and how it works. So it's very difficult for some like beginners to debug the issues with the networking. So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it might also be useful for the meta plugin to capture all of standard out and standard error from the plugin, and then write that to a debug file or have some mechanism to be able to do that. Because I'm trying to remember if writing stuff to standard out or standard error will cause an error if it's not the correctly formatted JSON response, or if that gets ignored. Maybe I should go look at that. But
you mean as in steal it or tee it?
say that again?
You mean as a sort of take the input and reformat it, and that's the input, the output that comes? Oh, sorry, nothing. Or to sort of make a copy by teeing the streams, and then
Something like that.
reformat, and you will get double sort of entries, pretty much. I'm scared that there might be people that have sort of log listeners that looks for the original CNI and so on.
True.
However bad they are, right?
Yeah. Anyway, just a thought. I think we do need
I think it would be good to have when you have many networks and you set up many, to have it from one place, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Graal, you'll write something up there.
Yeah.
Because then, I mean, that you could in reality also parse, if you go all the way, parse what comes from the standard CNIs and write it in a correlated form, because that's normally the problem when you start to having multi-things, a correlation of the different.
I think Sharath has put something in the chat. STD output is passed by kubelet if not formatted in a expected format. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. I just remember I've had hard times debugging CNI plugins before, and also what bits. Anyway, doesn't matter. I'll figure out what I've had problems with before and probably drop that into the agenda doc.
Okay. That one. The last one, we had some feedback. Actually, so some of the folks, Abdul and Luis, last week they presented about the SRV network device plugin to the resource management working group yesterday, and we got some feedback like we can't. The device plugin can invoke the CNI binaries. Actually, it's the same thing. I was like, what?
Well, I mean, there's basically three different options here. The first one is that you can use something like Multis that does all of this. The second one is you could use device plugin that also
Yeah,
essentially implements Multis.
yeah,
The problem that I see is that a device plugin that implements or essentially that implements this specification doing something like Multis does would have to be duplicated in every single device plugin. And it was my understanding that originally device plugins were meant to be more hardware specific.
yeah.
So like NVIDIA would have a device plugin for their GPUs and InfiniBand cards, and Intel might have a device plugin that knows how to do specific things for their cards. And if we rely on every device plugin to implement the Multis, or excuse me, the CRD specification, then that seems like it could get pretty fragmented.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my understanding was like. I mean, I don't know how to educate the resource management working group on this one because I was like trying to say like network is different. It's not a resource actually. I was like,
Yeah, I mean, I think there definitely needs to be cooperation between resource management and this group, if only because some of the things that we're talking about are hardware related, especially on the SRIOV front and other things. So we need to figure out what to do there going forward. But I don't think we've reached consensus yet, and I don't think anybody, either from this group or resource management or sig-network, has really come to a good consensus, I guess.
yeah,
So I feel
because
like, but
because it's not no one. You can develop a device plugin actually. It can do everything you want actually. So no one is stopping you to do that actually. But the problem is we already have a CNI component which does it. I mean, if you go for a brownfield terms, if you use in a project development, right, they will say brownfield. So use the components which is already exist in order to like for you to don't develop something like from the scratch. But when I looked at the device plugin implementation on the networking, it always looked like a greenfield. You doing everything from the scratch which is already there. So that's the only thing I was like, I mean, I like the way the device plugin works, but this is the only thing I was not sure. Like, this is what the device plugin is meant for, or what it's the definition actually.
yeah, and I think Tim had a comment in the meeting where the device plugin stuff got demoed that it seemed like overkill for like logical networks or SDN type stuff. So I don't know if that's really been addressed yet. I mean, obviously it might work for those networks, but it seems like
Yeah, you
it's a
can
little
make it work
heavyweight for
actually.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but also I think the last thing that was brought up was the confusion or the unnecessary bits between like what resource requirements 1 or something like that. It seemed like there could be some simplification of how resources were described.
Yeah, the definition of resource, I was like curious to know actually.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, basically my impression there is that we need to keep talking and keep having some of those regular meetings with the device plugin people and sig-network and keep hashing it out.
Yeah. So I think for next meeting we're planning to showcase that one network device plugin model, which combining both the device plugin and the CNI. I think I will try to invite some of the resource management working group folks as well to see what's their thought on this. Maybe. Yeah. Cool.
All right. Does anybody else have anything they want to talk about in the last 3 minutes? Anybody else in the call who hasn't said anything yet have anything to say? Going once? Going twice? All right. That's it.
See you in 2 weeks.
Yep. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.